Hello guys! Welcome back to my channel. A channel that discusses very dramatic movie stories, guys. In this video, I'll take you to watch a very dramatic movie about this story, entitled Scandalous. Before this story begins, don't forget to hit subscribe and like. Instead of just being curious, let's continue watching this video until the end. Okay?
The neon lights of the high-end strip club flickered like dying stars, casting long, jagged shadows across the velvet-lined walls where Eddie Funderi worked to survive. Once the pampered daughter of a wealthy businessman, her world had been incinerated when billionaire tycoon Trent Rexroth launched a predatory takeover of her father's company. The aftermath was a brutal descent into poverty. Her father spiraled into alcoholism. She was forced to drop out of college, and most urgently, her younger brother fell ill, requiring a life-saving surgery she could never afford. Driven by a volatile cocktail of desperation and righteous fury, Eddie saw an opportunity for payback when Rexroth himself walked into the club. She attempted to steal his wallet, hoping to snatch back even a fraction of what he had taken from her family. But Rexroth was not a man to be outplayed. He caught her red-handed, and in the suffocating tension of the dark corner, he looked into her eyes and realized exactly who she was. Instead of calling the police, he offered her a chilling warning and a few bills for the road, unaware that their fates were about to become hopelessly entangled in the corporate towers of the city. The following morning brought a shock that felt like a physical blow. Eddie's new job as a personal assistant, her last hope for a stable income, placed her directly under the thumb of the man she hated most. Trent Rexroth had purchased the company she just joined, transforming from her father's nemesis to her direct superior. The power dynamic was suffocating. In his mahogany-paneled office, Eddie tried to maintain her defiance, but Trent established a set of ironclad rules designed to strip her of her agency. No more stealing, no more backstabbing, and a strict prohibition on any form of romance or relationships. He viewed her as a thief and a kid, a nuisance from a failed dynasty. However, the icy walls of their professional relationship began to crack when Eddie encountered Trent's daughter, Luna. The little girl had been a silent ghost since her mother abandoned her 2 years prior, but in a rare moment of magic, Eddie's playful spirit made the child smile for the first time in years. Seeing his daughter's breakthrough, Trent's coldness shifted into a desperate, possessive need. He forced Eddie to stay, not just as an assistant, but as the only person capable of reaching the heart of the child he loved above all else. As Eddie navigated the treacherous waters of Rexroth's world, she was hit by a secondary wave of betrayal from her past. Her former college classmates, a group of elitist socialites, discovered her fall from grace and took every opportunity to humiliate her, mocking her family's bankruptcy and her time spent working at the club. Even more devastating was the shadow of her own father, who had turned into a monster of greed, demanding money she didn't have and threatening to harm her sick brother if she didn't provide a payout. The climax of this external pressure occurred when Eddie returned to the club to collect her final check, only to be cornered and bullied by her peers. They tried to force her onto the pole, intending to mark her as a filthy thief for their own amusement. Just as the darkness seemed absolute, Trent Rexroth intervened. He didn't arrive as a cold boss, but as a silent storm of authority, dismantling her tormentors and reminding the Eddie that she was now under the protection of the man who owned the very ground they stood on, setting the stage for a scandalous revelation that would challenge his own rules. The air in the office was stagnant, thick with the scent of Trent's expensive sandalwood cologne and the unspoken words of a war that had been simmering for years. Eddie stood by the window, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of her desk. She looked out at the skyline, seeing the buildings her father used to own, now just symbols of Rexroth's absolute victory. Every time Trent walked past her, she felt a shiver of pure, unadulterated loathing, yet there was something else, a magnetic pull she refused to acknowledge. He was an arrogant, gorgeous asshole who had ruined her life, but he was also the only person who looked at her and saw someone worth fighting with. The paradox was exhausting. She remembered the way he had looked at her in the club, his eyes dark with a mixture of disappointment and the intrigue. He didn't just see a thief, he saw a girl with fire in her veins. And in this glass-walled prison he called a company, she was determined to use that fire to burn his perfect little rules to the ground. Trent Rexroth was a man of absolute control, a master of the boardrooms who calculated human emotions like line items on a spreadsheet. But Eddie Funderry was a variable he hadn't accounted for. She was supposed to be a broken remnant of a defeated rival, yet she walked into his office every morning with her head held high and a sharp retort ready for every command. He watched her from behind his desk, noticing the way the morning light cut the gold in her hair and the defiant tilt of her chin. He told himself he only kept her around for Luna, that the child's smile was the only currency that mattered. But late at night, when the office was empty and the only sound was the hum of the air conditioner, he found himself replaying their first encounter. She was a kid, he told himself, a beautiful, dangerous kid who had more guts than half his executive board. Rule number 3 was supposed to protect him, but as he watched her work, he realized that a rule is only as strong as the man who makes it, and his resolve was beginning to feel remarkably fragile. Luna's laughter was a sound that had been missing from Trent's life for 730 days. It was a fragile, crystalline sound that felt like a miracle in the middle of his cold, corporate existence. He stood in the doorway of the nursery, watching Eddie perform a simple magic trick with a soda can, and he felt a pang of something he hadn't felt in years, hope. For 2 years, he had hired the best therapists and the most expensive nannies, but none of them had been able to break through the wall of silence his daughter had built around herself. Eddie did it without even trying. She didn't treat Luna like a patient or a tragedy. She treated her like a friend. In that moment, Trent realized that Eddie wasn't just Jordan Funderry's daughter. She was the key to his own daughter's salvation. He felt a surge of possessiveness that went beyond the professional. He would pay her any amount, give her any title, just to keep that light in Luna's eyes. But he also knew that the closer Eddie got to his family, the harder it would be to keep her away from his heart. The social hierarchy of the city was a predatory beast, and the Eddie's former friends were its sharpest teeth. Emma, a girl Eddie had once shared secrets with in the dorms, stood in the hallway of the office building, her designer bag swinging like a weapon. "I heard a rumor, Eddie," she sneered, her voice loud enough to draw the attention of the surrounding staff. "I heard you were working the poll to pay for your brother's medicine. How the mighty have fallen." The surrounding whispers felt like 1,000 tiny needles. Eddie felt the heat rising in her cheeks, but she didn't look away. She remembered the nights she had spent at the club, the tired ache in her feet and the hollow feeling in her stomach, all while Emma was sipping champagne on a yacht her daddy bought. The injustice of it was a physical weight. But before she could respond, Trent Rexroth appeared from around the corner, his presence causing a sudden, suffocating silence. He didn't look at Emma. He looked at Eddie, his gaze assessing. "Miss Funderry, you're late with the afternoon reports," he sighed, his voice cold and flat. It wasn't a rescue, not exactly, but it was a reminder that in this building, only one man's opinion mattered. Jordan Funderry was a ghost of a man, a hollowed-out shell of the father Eddie remembered. He cornered her in the parking garage after her shift, the smell of cheap whiskey clinging to his clothes like a second skin. "I need more, Eddie," he rasped, his eyes bloodshot and desperate. Those doctors are asking for another 10 grand. If you don't get it from that Rexroth bastard, you don't know what I'll do. You might just have to tell the press about your little secret. Eddie looked at him and he felt a profound, aching sadness. This was the man who had taught her how to ride a bike, who had promised to protect her from the world. Now, he was the one she needed protection from. The betrayal was absolute. She realized that she was caught in a pincher movement between the man who broke her family and the man who was currently dismantling what was left of it. She had to stay at the job, not just for her brother, but for her own survival. She had to endure the rules, the insults, and the scandalous whispers, because the alternative was a darkness she couldn't even imagine. The office gala was meant to be a celebration of the merger, a night of opulence and forced smiles. Eddie wore a dress that felt like armor, a midnight blue silk that Trent had ordered for her as a requirement of the job. As she moved through the room, she felt the eyes of the elite on her, the same people who had once invited her to their parties and they now looked at her like she was a stain on the carpet. She saw Trent in the center of the room, surrounded by supermodels and the actresses, the hottest bachelor playing his role to perfection. He looked at her over the rim of his glass, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Was it pity? Or was it the same hunger she felt every time their hands brushed? She retreated to the balcony, needing the cold night air to clear her head. The city lights blurred into a sea of gold and silver, a reminder of everything she had lost and everything she was currently fighting to reclaim. She didn't hear Trent approach until his hand was on the small of her back, a touch that felt like an electric shock through the silk of her dress. "You're hiding again, kid," Trent whispered, his voice a low vibration against the back of her neck. Eddie didn't turn around, but she felt her breath hitch. "I'm not hiding. I'm observing the vultures in their natural habitat." Trent let out a soft, dry laugh. "You're a cynic, just like your father. Don't you dare compare me to him," Eddie snapped, finally turning to face him. The proximity was dangerous. She could see the fine lines around his eyes and the way his jaw was set in a permanent line of tension. For a moment, the billionaire tycoon and the bankrupt daughter were just two people caught in a web of their own making. "My rules are so for a reason, Eddie," he sighed, his voice dropping an octave. "Because when people like us get involved, it always ends in a scandal. And I've had enough scandals for one lifetime." He leaned in closer, his lips inches from hers, and for a heartbeat, Eddie thought he might actually break rule number 3. But the sound of glass shattering inside the ballroom broke the spell, and Trent was gone as quickly as he had appeared, leaving her alone in the cold night air. The internal conflict within Trent was a battle between his tactical mind and his primal instincts. He had spent his entire life building walls, both in business and in his personal life, but Eddie was like a wrecking ball made of moonlight and defiance. He found himself checking the security cameras not for threats, but just to see where she was in the building. He told Greta, his senior executive, that Eddie was just a kid and not his type, but the lie tasted like ash in his mouth. He knew she was Jordan's daughter, a legacy of a man he despised, but she was also the woman who could make his daughter smile and his own heart hammer against his ribs. The risk was immense. A relationship with an assistant was a PR nightmare. A relationship with the daughter of a ruined rival was a career-ending scandal. But as he watched her handle a difficult client with a grace that far surpassed her years, he realized that he was no more longer in control of the narrative. He was just a man waiting for a girl to decide his fate. Eddie's brother, Toby, was the only thing that kept her grounded in the midst of the corporate insanity. She visited him at the hospital every evening, bringing him stories of Luna and the magic tricks she was learning. Seeing him lay Andy weak in the sterile white bed was a constant reminder of the stakes she was playing for. You know it's hard working for him, but you're a fun daddy. We don't break. Eddie kissed his forehead, her heart breaking a little more every day. She felt like a double agent, working for the man who destroyed her past to secure her brother's future. She thought about Trent's XLM condoms in his desk and his supermodel girlfriends, and she felt a pang of jealousy that she had no more right to feel. He was her boss, her nemesis, and her brother's benefactor. He was everything she was supposed to avoid, and everything she found herself wanting in the quiet hours of the night. The confrontation at the strip club was the moment the world shifted for Eddie. She had gone but only to get what was rightfully hers, a few $100s in tips and her final check. But the presence of Emma and the others transformed the simple errand into a theater of cruelty. They surrounded her, their laughter a jagged, ugly sound that echoed off the mirrors. "Come on, Eddie, give us a show. We know you're good at it," Emma shrieked, her hand reaching out to pull at Eddie's shirt. The feeling of being cornered, of being treated like a piece of meat for the amusement of those who had never known a day of struggle, triggered a primal rage in Eddie. She fought back, her nails catching Emma's cheek, but there were too many of them. She felt the cold metal of the pole against her back and the hands of the bouncers men she had once called colleagues gripping her arms. She closed her eyes, waiting for the final humiliation. But then the heavy double doors of the club were kicked open with a sound like a thunderclap. Trent Rexroth didn't just walk into the club. He invaded it. He looked like a god of vengeance in his black wool coat, his eyes scanning the room with a lethal clarity. Behind him stood two of his personal security team, men who moved with a military precision that made the club's bouncers look like amateurs. He didn't say a word as he walked toward the stage, but the crowd parted like the Red Sea. He stepped onto the platform, his hand closing around the wrist of the man holding Eddie with a grip that made the man wince. "Get your hands off her," Trent sighed, his voice a low, terrifying growl that vibrated through the entire room. He didn't look at Eddie yet. His focus was entirely on her tormentors. Emma and her group stood frozen, their arrogance vanishing in the face of absolute, unmitigated power. They knew who he was. Everyone knew who he was. And they realized, with a sudden, sickening jolt, that the girl they had been bullying was under his personal protection. Trent turned to Eddie, his expression softening for a fraction of a second before hardening back into a mask of iron. He pulled his coat off and draped it over her shoulders, the warmth and the scent of him enveloping her like a sanctuary. "We're leaving," he sighed, his tone leaving no more room for argument. He led her through the club, his arm firmly around her waist, as the music died and the crowd watched in stunned silence. As they reached the exit, Trent stopped and turned to the club owner, a man who was currently trembling behind the bar. "Tomorrow, my lawyers will be in touch. This property is being rezoned. You want it leveled by the end of the week." It was a display of power that was as petty as it was profound. He was destroying a landmark of her suffering simply because he could. Eddie looked up at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and a new, terrifying kind of respect. He was still the man who bankrupted her father, but in that moment, he was also the man who had saved her soul from the gutter. In the back of the armored SOFA, the silence between them was no more longer cold. It was charged with the electricity of a storm about to break. Eddie huddled in his coat, feeling the weight of the previous hour pressing against her chest. "Why did you come?" she asked, her voice a trembling whisper. Trent stared out the window at the passing city lights, his jaw set. "Because my daughter needs you, Eddie. And because you can't have my assistant being marked by trust fund daddies who work for me." It was a corporate answer, a logical shield, but they both knew it was a lie. He had come because he couldn't stand the thought of her being touched by anyone else. He had come because the rules he made were never meant to protect her from him. They were meant to protect him from the feeling that he would burn the city down just to see her smile. I'm not just a project, Trent, Eddie sighed, her voice growing stronger. I'm a person. My family was rich once, too. You know how men like you operate. You rescue US so you can own US. Trent finally turned to her, his amber eyes glowing in the dim light of the car. I don't want to own you, Eddie. I want you to stop being a thief and to start being the woman you know you are. The proximity was unbearable. The car hit a bump, and Eddie was thrown against him, her hands instinctively clutching his lapels. Their eyes met, and for the first time, there was no more hate, no more history, only the raw, pulsating hunger of two people who had been fighting an inevitable collision. Trent didn't wait for her to beg. He closed the distance, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was a scandalous rejection of every rule he had ever written. It was a kiss of possession, of desperation, and of a love that was destined to be a scandal. The scandal broke the next morning, but not in the way Trent had feared. A photo of him leading Eddie out of the club had been leaked to the tabloids, the headlines screaming about the billionaire and the bankrupt assistant. Greta stood in his office, her face a mask of professional concern. "We need to issue a statement, Trent. This could affect the stock price. The board is already asking questions about her father." Trent sat behind his desk, looking at the photo on his computer screen. He didn't see a scandal. He saw the way he was holding her, as if she were the only thing in the world that mattered. "Issue a statement," Trent sighed, his voice calm and certain. "Tell them that Eddie Fundary is the new vice president of philanthropy. And tell them that anyone who has a problem with her history can take it up with me personally." Greta blinked, stunned by the sheer audacity of the move. He wasn't hiding her. He was elevating her. He was making his scandal his greatest achievement. Eddie walked into the office that morning, expecting to be fired or shamed. Instead, she was met with a new badge and a corner office next to Trent's. She looked at the gold-embossed nameplate and felt a surge of triumph that had nothing to do with money. She had outplayed him. She had turned his rules into a ladder. She walked into his office without knocking, her head held higher than ever. Trent looked up from his work, a small, knowing smile playing on his lips. "Ready to work, Miss Fundary?" he asked. Eddie leaned over his desk, the fire in her eyes now a steady, brilliant flame. "I'm ready to change the rules, Mr. Rexroth." The scandalous journey was far from over, but as they looked at each other, they realized that the greatest victory wasn't in the takeover of a company, but in the surrender of the hearts that were finally, perfectly, even. The internal architecture of the Rexroth Group began to shift under Eddie's influence. She didn't just manage the philanthropy department. She transformed it into a vehicle for social justice, targeting the very predatory lending practices that had destroyed her father. She worked with a ferocity that silenced her critics, proving that she was more than just a kid or a pretty face. Trent watched her from the sidelines, providing the resources and the political cover she needed to succeed. He realized that by bringing her into his world, he hadn't just saved the child's smile. He had found a partner who could challenge him to be more than a tycoon. Their relationship remained a scandal to the outsiders, but inside the glass walls of the tower, it was the only thing that felt real. Luna's progress continued to be the heartbeat of their home. With Eddie as a permanent fixture in their lives, the little girl began to talk, her voice a sweet, melodic reminder of the power of connection. She called Eddie and the two of them were inseparable. Trent would often come home to find them in the garden, planting flowers or playing with a new puppy. The cold, sterile mansion was finally becoming a home, filled with the scent of jasmine and the sound of laughter. Trent realized that he had spent his life accumulating things, but Eddie had taught him the value of memories. He was no more longer just the Rexroth boss. He was a fuzzer, a partner, and a man who was finally at peace with his own reflection. Jordan Funderry's final attempt at blackmail failed spectacularly. When he tried to sell his story to a rival tabloid, he found that the editor was one of Trent's oldest friends. The story was killed before it even reached the printers, and Jordan was offered a choice: a quiet life in a high-end rehabilitation facility funded by Eddie's department, or a permanent exile from the city. He chose the facility, finally realizing that his daughter was a force he could no more longer manipulate. Eddie visited him once a month, not out of duty, but out of a desire to find the man she remembered from her childhood. It was a slow process of healing, but with Trent by her side, she felt strong enough to face the ghosts of her past. As the years passed, Eddie and Trent became the city's most formidable power couple, a union of old money fire and new money ice. They used their influence to reshape the corporate landscape, ensuring that the predatory practices of the past were replaced with a culture of integrity and accountability. Eddie remained the scandalous Fei, a title she wore with pride, a reminder to everyone that your past doesn't define your future, your courage does. Trent remained her silent strength, the man who had outplayed the world to give her the life she always deserved. They were a testament to the power of a second chance and the transformative nature of a love that refuses to be quiet. The narrative concludes with a final image of the city skyline at night. The Rexroth Tower glows with a soft, steady light, a beacon for all who are searching for a way out of the shadows. In the penthouse office, the silhouettes can be seen standing by the window, looking out at the world they have helped to heal. They are two souls who found their home in the most unlikely of places, and they stayed together until the dawn. The billionaire and the assistant, the nemesis and the savior, they are the architects of a new era, and their story is a gift to anyone who believes in the power of a heart that refuses to be broken. The visual memory of Jordan Funderry's fall and the club's neon lights fading into the background of Eddie's life becomes absolute. We are left with the echoing footsteps of a woman who realized that her power was never something to be given away or granted by a man. Eddie Funderry's transformation from a betrayed daughter to a visionary leader remains a beacon for anyone trapped in a toxic narrative. She proved that the most hardened circumstances can be softened by a single, bold decision to say no more to a lie. Her life became a lighthouse for others lost in the storm of emotional manipulation, showing them that there is always a path back to dignity. The story of the stolen wallet became a part of the city's cultural fabric, often referenced in songs and stories about the unexpected nature of fate. It was a reminder that the smallest actions, a decision to take a chance, a decision to be honest in a dark room, can have ripples that change the course of history. People would often walk past the site where the club once stood and feel a sense of hope, a reminder that even in the most competitive and cold environments, there is the potential for something beautiful to be restored. The wallet was no more longer a symbol of theft, but a symbol of redemption. As we look back on the full 60-minute journey, we realize that the Scandalous narrative is more than just a romance. It's a philosophical inquiry into the nature of worth. It challenges us to look at the people around us with new eyes, to see the queen in the assistant and the hero in the tycoon. It is a call to action to be the Trent in someone's story, the ally who stands up when it matters most. And it is a reminder to be the Eddie in our own lives, the person who refuses to be outplayed by a lie. The Rexroth Funderry legacy is a permanent mark on the world, a testament to the fact that we are all interconnected. Our choices matter, our voices matter, and our love matters. Eddie and Trent proved that even in a world of billionaires and corporate giants, the only true power is the power of the heart. Their story is over, but the light they ignited will never be extinguished. The city skyline at night now features the Rexroth Tower as its centerpiece, its windows glowing with a soft, steady light. It stands as a monument to the couple who chose to be true in a world of fakes. The revolving doors continue to turn, bringing in new people with their own secrets and their own dreams. And somewhere, in the hum of the corporate ambition and the clicking of heels on the marble floors, the spirit of Eddie and Trent remains a reminder that justice is always worth the fight, and that the best stories are the ones that start with a single, bold decision to speak the truth. The transition from the boardroom to the domestic bliss of their later years was a serene and fulfilling chapter for Trent and Eddie. They spent their mornings in the library, Trent writing his reflections on ethical leadership and Eddie managing the foundation's educational grants. They had built a world where the noise of the city felt distant, a quiet sanctuary where they could finally enjoy the peace they had earned. Their children, now successful in their own right, visited frequently, bringing the laughter of a new generation into the house. Eddie looked at her life and he realized that every decision, even the night in the club, had led her to this moment of absolute contentment. Trent's devotion to Eddie never wavered, even as the decades added lines to his face and the silver to his hair. He was her silent guardian, the man who had outplayed the world to give her the life she had always deserved. He realized that his greatest achievement wasn't his business empire, but the trust and the love of the woman who had walked into his office and changed his world. They were a testament to the power of resilience and the transformative nature of true connection. The tycoon had become the partner in the only way that mattered. The Rexroth and Fundary Foundation continued to flourish under the leadership of their eldest daughter, who possessed Eddie's fierce spirit and Trent's strategic mind. The foundation had become a global leader in social ethics, influencing policies in dozens of countries. Eddie's influence was felt in every program, a persistent voice for the vulnerable that could not be silenced. She had turned her private pain into a public healing, a transformation that made every second of her struggle worth the cost. The Rexroth name remained a beacon of hope for millions. As we look back on the full 60-minute journey, we realize that the Scandalous narrative is a masterpiece of human experience. It is a call to action to be the spark of truth in our own lives, and to never be afraid to strike a blow if it means finding the light. The journey is over, the truth is out, and the queen is finally at peace. The final credits roll will offer the image of a single white rose blooming in the center of the Rexroth estate garden. The audio is the sound of a soft summer wind and the distant chime of the city bells. It is a sound of peace, of completion, and of a promise kept. The 60-minute journey is done, the mystery is solved, and the love is forever. We are finished. The aftermath of the Rexroth scandal wasn't just a personal victory for Eddie. It was a systemic win for every woman who had ever been treated as a commodity. The Rexroth legal teams worked tirelessly to pass the Eddie Act, a comprehensive set of laws designed to protect employees from administrative abuse and to provide a clear path for reporting corporate corruption without fear of retaliation. The act was adopted by nearly every state in the country, a legacy that ensured Eddie's suffering would never be repeated in another boardroom. She had successfully outplayed the darkness by becoming the architect of the light. The story of the bankrupt Pa became a legend that transcended the boundaries of time and the culture. It was told in classrooms, in shelters, and in high-rise offices as a reminder that your worth is not a gift from others, but a flame you carry within yourself. People would often look up at the Rexroth Tower and feel a sense of strength, knowing that the woman who helped rule it was once the girl who was kicked to the curb. She was the living proof that a queen is not born of a crown, but of the battles she chooses to fight. And so, we finish from a kitchen floor to the top of the world, from a betrayal to a billionaire's legacy. The journey of Eddie Fundary and the Trent Rexroth is complete. May their story be a blessing to your heart and a guide for your soul as you navigate the shadows of your own life. Remember that no more matter how long the night, the dawn is coming for those who hold onto their truth. The queen has moved on, the tycoon is at peace, and the love is eternal. We are finished with the narrative of Scandalous, but the light it ignited will burn forever. The final notes of the narration blend with the sounds of a vibrant, healthy community, a community that Eddie and the Trent helped to shape. The streets are safe, the people are free, and the shadow of the Scandalous label is a distant, honored memory. The legacy of their integrity remains a beacon of progress, a promise that the heart's absolute victory over the shadows is not just a dream, but a reality for those who are brave enough to believe. The story is finished, but the impact is eternal. The Scandalous couple has moved on, and in doing so, they have carried the world with them into the light. Goodbye to the past, and hello to the future that was born from a single, bold decision to laugh.